Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Judy Wasige, and I worked here in the College of Social Sciences a few years ago. So it's really nice to put some faces to names to faces. Like I see Mia there. I think I worked closely with you. I saw Cindy Gray here earlier and a few other colleagues that we worked with at that time where I was a community engagement officer in the College of Social Sciences. So it feels really great to be back home and to such an exciting initiative as well. I've really wanted to have this kind of collaboration whereby I can, do my work here, but also have an impact back home. So Josephine, thank you so much for starting this initiative and for also inviting me to come along. So I'll now invite over the panelists for today. So we have Professor Iruka Okeke, who's online, and I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. We also have Professor Tayo Grace from Babcock University, is one of the panelists, and we also have Professor Oyenumi Adejoke. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Welcome to the panel. Before we start off the panel, I'm going to ask all our panelists to introduce themselves. And this particular panel is about research excellence in Africa through gender responsive leadership. So first of all, say hello to the audience and just introduce yourself before we kick off with the questions. So I'll start with Professor Iruka, who's online. If you can just introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. So my name is Iruka Okeke. I'm a professor of pharmaceutical microbiology at the University of Ibadan. And I'm also a Callistus Juma Science Leadership Fellow, supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Okay, thank you, Professor Okeke. So we'll move on to Professor Tayo.
My name is Grace Tayo. I'm a professor of animal nutrition from Babcock University, Nigeria.
Thank you. Next, we've got Professor Oyenumi. Yeah, okay.
You can just call me Adejoke. My name is Adejoke Oyewumi, and I'm a professor of law at the University of Lagos, Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Judy Wasige. I said I was the community engagement officer in the College of Social Sciences about 3 years ago here, but I now lecture in public health at Glasgow Caledonian University. So this panel is going to be focusing on research excellence through gender responsive leadership. The last panel was very much more subjective, and I'm hoping that we're going to lift that to speak a little bit more about the structures that would facilitate that. So the first question to the panelists then is, how would you define research excellence in the African context, and what indicators best capture it beyond traditional global metrics? When I first saw this question, I thought it's a little bit unfair because what is excellence? And we had the panel and discussions earlier on speaking about epistemic injustice. And yeah, it's quite a skewed question, but I'm gonna let the panelists give us an idea from their own experiences on what they would define as research excellence in the African context, in particular thinking about non-traditional global metrics. Okay, we'll start with Professor Okeke.
Okay, thank you. And I did want to highlight that I actually couldn't hear the other two panelists at all. So maybe we pass the microphone around, because if I'm not hearing them, then it means the other online participants aren't hearing them either. Thanks for the question, which I found a bit unusual and difficult to address because it kept trying to exclude global metrics of excellence. And I think it's extremely important to not, let me try and make sure I pick the right words. not to define excellence in any particular context so that other contexts would not recognize it. So what I'm trying to say here is that there might be unique things that African scientists, scholars can contribute that would not necessarily be available from scholars elsewhere in the world. But my hope is that everyone in the world would recognize that as excellence. Something I see a lot in the setting I work in or other settings within Nigeria is an acceptance that, well, if we can't meet what are defined as perhaps global metrics, then we should create our own metrics that nobody recognizes. The problem with that then is that you have excellence in that context and not in other contexts. My own preference is, first of all, to define, I mean, the word excellence means very best. Of course, very best could look very different depending on what you're working on and where you're working, but we would all recognize very best. And then when we have defined excellence that way, to be supportive so that anyone, anywhere can be their very best. So, I mean, that's essentially how I would look at it. And when we were talking about structures, the structures I see are structures that would be supportive so that we can see excellence in every setting. And maybe there'll be setting specific structures to offer that support, but I hesitate to define excellence in a manner that it would be considered excellence in one setting and not recognized in another setting. I'll stop there because I really want to hear what the other speakers have to say.
Thank you very much. I agree with Professor Okeke to some extent, because somehow, if we have to define excellence differently, for our own people or context, then perhaps there might be some questions about whether it's really excellence or not. But having said that, what are the traditional metrics that are used to determine or adjudge excellence in research? Publication in high-impact journals, for example. Citation counts is another one. Awards and grants, international recognition. What's wrong with that? Why is it necessary to talk about perhaps trying to explore research in the African context to see how easily or otherwise we fall into those categories? My personal experience is that, regrettably, many of these standards or yardsticks are interpreted in the light of international research. And when we talk about international research, we're talking about maybe research that emanates from or focuses on issues that are relevant to, the countries in the North, research institutions in the North. And so you find that as an African researcher, sometimes you work on research that is locally relevant, that addresses issues that are contemporary, that are research-worthy in your own context. But when you want to publish, when you put some of these research works forward for publication in the Western-based academic and other journals, you may be told that, oh, this is not the focus of the journal. This is not really relevant for the readers of that particular journal. And so sometimes you find that African researchers, unfortunately, even our own institutions determine high impact research and acceptable research in the context of what is applicable in these other countries, what has been published in these other countries. And this leaves local researchers in a dilemma. But the truth is that research has to target particular issues, particular problems. And what's a better way to do it than to address problems that exist in your own locality, in your own peculiar environment, rather than trying to do so in other contexts. And so I would say that yes, research excellence has its own traditional metrics, but for us to have a fair balance and some level of justice, it is imperative for us to begin to look beyond international, standardized types of research and make it a bit more context based. It should have reference. I'm a lawyer, for example. I'm interested in laws and policy frameworks that can facilitate, gender responsive work opportunities, research, human rights, and so on. But I can best do it from my own peculiar environment. What are the issues that we have to deal with? What are the cultural, societal, sometimes even religious contexts around us that require further interrogation with a view to advancing solutions or possible or prospective solutions to societal problems. So if I am told that, oh, this is not relevant in a particular context, and I therefore do not satisfy what is globally, accepted as research excellence, then that can make it very challenging. So that's what I would like to say, that it's good to have some bit of flexibility and ensure that all contexts are taken into account, as long as we can show that the research is relevant, it interrogates challenges or problems within a particular society, and it does proffer possible solutions to those problems. Perhaps very quickly, before I hand over the microphone, I will also want to talk briefly about some issues or challenges that are peculiar to the humanities, arts, law, and so on. Perhaps for those in the sciences, and we're talking about it this morning, sometimes the requirements, the factors can be quite standardized. But for law, for humanities, sometimes for social sciences, it's usually context-based. And so that really is important, and we have to take account of that. Thank you.
Thank you. To take it up from that, yes, today we have globally accepted performance indicators for excellence in research. But when you look at excellence in itself, it's a journey. You don't get to a particular point to say, okay, this is excellence and that's the end of it. So we keep improving. Now, excellence in research in the African context has to comply with what is generally accepted. We are talking about originality of research. You talk about innovation, you talk about scientific integrity, you talk about the robustness of the methodology, and we can't lower the standards when it comes to that. But like the previous speaker said, we need to take some other issues into consideration. One area that I feel that we often overlook is the area of indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge is very important because research aims at solving problems, issues, and challenges. But sometimes we assume that, we need to bring tailor-made solutions from the West and just dump it or adopt it in Africa, which may not always be the best because we're not looking at the context. We need to look at that, and we need to have what we community engagement. Such research should take into consideration the needs of the society. And even in the conception of the problem, the implementation and everything, the community engagement is very important. That is what makes research to be impactful. And so what excellence are we talking about if the research is not impactful in that particular community or the society? So we need to look at all of that very seriously. And resilience is also a very important factor. The African setting sometimes is a resource-constrained environment. And so research carried out sometimes can be very difficult. So do we take that into consideration as well? Resilience that is put into the research that we carry out. Those are issues that we need to consider. It should also include capacity building because of sustainability. Again, you don't dump research outcome on the community without any, any networking efforts, without any engagement of the end users. At the end of the day, what happens? So what excellence are we talking about again? So these are issues that needs to be considered as we look at excellence in research. It's evolving, and we keep evolving. Thank you.
Yeah, that was quite insightful. And what I'm picking up there is that when we talk about excellence, what is it that we mean? And yes, we can have a standard of what excellence should be, but who decides on what that excellence is? Who's round the table when that excellence is decided? Earlier on today, we heard about the amount of research funding that goes to the African continent. And from the data that I have, we have like less than 1% of the global funding, going to Africa. Can you start comparing then about the type of research that's going on in Africa with the one that's, perhaps here? And I do come from Kenya, and recent data, for example, recent reports show that Kenya is the ghostwriting capital of the world. We have people who've written PhDs for hundreds of people in the West. Is that not research excellence? Can that be measurable? Are we measuring it? So we need to really consider and think about that epistemic injustice. We have a lot of manpower, a lot of knowledge and understanding in this context, but how is it captured? And how is it resourced? So can we start resourcing those Kenyan ghostwriters to make sure that that excellence is actually captured and also propagated within that environment? Okay. One other thing I picked up, of course, was that publications, citations, and so on are seen as, markers of excellence. But who owns the publications? Do we have, African journals that are seen as excellent journals that have high impact factors? What are the issues that are being tackled in these journals? And I think this was picked up on. So I'll just leave you with that as we continue with the discussion. Building on that then, can you share examples of African research institutions or programs that have demonstrated excellence and global impact, and what factors enabled their success? So I think because Professor Okeke is online, I'll start with you again.
So, in terms of thinking about examples of excellence, there are many, but maybe I'll share some that actually speak to the issue that's come up in the earlier discussion about who decides what excellence is. One example, and I can use this as an example of a movement, if you like, is to appreciate the fact that many journals are biased in terms of, and by the way, I'm a scientist, so I'll keep it to the scientific field mostly, although I do dabble in science and technology studies. So many journals are biased in terms of what they will accept. And many biased journals have high impact factors. And a global metric for excellence is what impact factor is the journal that you have published in, and how many citations do you have, and so on. So one way that this is being undone, unfortunately far too slowly, is to invest very strongly in African publications and global publications for which there's some governance over bias. So I can give two examples. One of them is the African Journal of Lab Medicine, which is a Pan-African journal of the African Society of Lab Medicine. I'm no longer the editor-in-chief, but I used to be. And the mandate I inherited from my predecessor was that this journal was going to be one of the most important lab medicine journals in the world, even though it was an African journal. I remember the New England Journal of Medicine and the British Medical Journal are really local journals. So the idea was to do something like that for Africa. And so we started the journal. We made sure that it was enrolled in all the bibliometric things so that it would get the measures. We supported authors to shape their papers so that they would be readable by everyone without changing the content, just the way it was presented, so that we could rapidly rise the impact factor and still create a journal where people could publish context-specific work, because, by the way, if you're working towards excellence, the easiest way to do that is to work on things that are within your niche, that are less accessible to people from elsewhere. And I mean, this journal is not yet the Lancet or Nature or Science, but it's up there with the field-specific journals that are considered having a decent impact factor, indexed by all the indexers and so on. So that's one example, and a parallel example is PLOS Global Public Health. The PLOS journals are open access. PLOS Global Public Health was designed to globalize public health publication without bias. And I remember when the conversations were starting at the beginning, there was this talk about, well, should it be called PLOS Global Health? And many of us kicked back because global health itself is such a field that is fraught with so much bias against Africans and other people working in less resourced parts of the world. And we got the feedback actually worked. It was renamed PLOS Global Public Health. And that's another example of a journal. I'm not involved in it. I have published in it. That decided that, can we deal with the bias so that excellent work that is being done in niches like where I work in Nigeria or elsewhere in Africa can be seen by the world as being excellent. So in the interest of time, I'll just limit it to publication, but I am happy to share other examples if people are interested. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Okeke. So I'll pass it on to.
Thank you very much. For my part, I'd like to talk about not just publications this time, but some examples of research centers of excellence. Well, let me focus on my university. So I know that we have centers of excellence in ARUA, that's African Research Universities, across the continent, in South Africa, in Egypt, in Nigeria, among others. Focusing on Nigeria and University of Lagos in particular, we have the Center of Excellence on malaria diagnosis and research. Malaria has been recognized as one of the highest killers, of young people, especially young children. So it's a very important area of research for us. We also have the Center of Excellence in Development of Entrepreneurship, okay, entrepreneurship and skills acquisition. That's very important because of the high unemployment rates that we have in our environment, where people graduate and they really do not have adequate opportunities for employment. So the Center of Excellence on Entrepreneurship and Skills Development aims to support students, even before they graduate, into just looking beyond employment to actually starting off businesses for themselves and how this can be achieved. We also have the Center of Excellence for Herbal Medicine Research. That's very important because we have over 60% of our population being dependent on the use of herbal medicines. And we know that the use of nature-based resources, nature-based medicines and other things for health, for cosmetics and other purposes is increasingly becoming popular even in the Western countries. But the challenge really has been that there is no adequate research carried out in these areas. We just know that, our grandparents used to use this particular herb or this particular leaf, for certain conditions. But the dosage is not certain. Sometimes the packaging could be scary. That's just the truth when you look at it and it's like, are you sure you are not going to contact something else from taking this? So now we have the Center of Excellence in Herbal Medicines Development, taking on the challenge, interacting with indigenous medicine practitioners, tapping into their knowledge and then engaging in research to advance, development of some of these medicines and make them in tandem with best practices in terms of medicines and drug production and all that. Among others, we have the Center of Excellence for Urbanization and Housing. I come from Lagos, and Lagos has one of the, I can hear some people sighing. If you've been to Lagos before, you know that it's a major, I don't want to say it's overpopulated because there's always room every day. New people are coming into Lagos from other states, from the suburbs, and housing has become a major problem. And so there's this Center of Excellence that targets, addressing these the gaps in housing and urbanization and so on. I'm happy to say that almost like 3/4 of some of these centers are either headed or, are either chaired or co-chaired, by women. And that also shows that women are interested in practical research in societal impact. Well, not just women. The research we tend to emphasize over there looks at societal problems and challenges and how they can best be addressed. I think some of the solutions that they're coming up with are of far more value than just having information published somewhere that has no practical relevance. So I see those developments as evidence of excellence in research. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Just to add that one of the examples she gave is part of the indigenous knowledge we're talking about. Africa is a green area where you have a lot of areas to research into, very green, and there are lots of opportunities in terms of research. One of the grants awarding bodies that has been funding research in Africa is AREF, Africa Research Excellence Fund. And a few researchers in my university have won the grant. So I will just elaborate on some of the studies that have been carried out or ongoing research that we have right now. For example, there is this study on, it's funded by New Frontiers in Research Fund, UKRI, and Sao Paulo Research Foundation. It's on building resilience against climate change among women farmers, smallholder women farmers. This is focused on women, these smallholder women farmers, because they are more or less marginalized. They don't have a voice when it comes to climate change. They don't have access to information on how to mitigate climate change. And so the study is focusing on, one, studying their conservation agriculture practices. Like again, we said, there is indigenous knowledge. What have they been doing? Because this problem has been with us for a while now. So how have they been coping? So the study is focusing on what they are doing right now, the practices, the indigenous knowledge that they have about conservation agriculture. And then going beyond that to now train and enhance their socio-economic status through support. We'll take the indigenous knowledge further, enhance it to help them against, to build resilience against climate change. And the funding also supports capacity building, because that's also very important for continuity, for sustainability. It's a 3-year project, and it's about $700,000. It's still ongoing. We have another one that is by Commonwealth Partnerships on antimicrobial stewardship. This is funded by Fleming Fund and I think Departments of Healthcare and Social something for UK. And what is this focused on? Antimicrobial resistance is a global issue now. It's also affecting Africa with the increasing burden of diseases, also with high rate of infection. And this is a society where anybody can go to the chemist and purchase antibiotics and just use it. And so it's a big problem. So the study is on antimicrobial stewardship. It's training and building capacity in antimicrobial stewardship among healthcare workers, because they need to know, they need to be more aware, and they need to put some steps in place to combat this serious issue. That's also by £100,000. It's ongoing. We have also worked with the Nigerian Air Force on terrorism. You know, the Nigerian government has done a lot to combat terrorism, but we still have limitations. So the study is trying to look at limitations, gaps, and how this can be improved to ensure that we overcome the issue of terrorism. So we have several projects ongoing like that. But the basic factors that have enhanced the success of these projects have been strong leadership, a strong team, expertise, global collaboration, and funding. Those have been the enablers to the success of those projects.
So that was quite insightful. But one thing, because of time, I'm just going to throw in there, is that there's so many partnerships with, you know, the West, where we've had a lot of impactful, you know, programs with institutions in Africa. However, I'll just put in a word there to say that in most cases we find that, in terms of citations, you find that most African researchers are stuck in the middle, whereby in terms of publication, you're not seen to have been, key in contributing to the work. So if we think about issues like Ebola, for example, there was so much work that had already been done before, whoever came on ground and claimed that they were, that they had an upper hand in that research. And there's so many examples across. So yes, partnerships are really important. We've seen a lot of, impactful work coming from that. But I think as we continue creating partnerships, we have to be careful that, as people coming from the West, we have the humility to actually put those who've done the work at the forefront of it. So just for the last question, and I'll give each one of you can I give 2 minutes? Is that too much? 6 minutes to finish up? Yeah. So it's about, because we are talking about gender responsive leadership here, is to ask, how do you think gender responsive leadership strengthens or can accelerate pathways to excellence in practical terms? And perhaps when you're thinking about that, to consider what evidence-based gender-responsive strategies could help African institutions enhance research quality, collaboration, and impact over the next decade. So now we are thinking ahead. So I'll start with you first, Professor Adejoke.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just share an example of what I have experienced, what we have experienced again in our environment. I think 15 or so years ago, 15, 17 years ago, we had a female dean in the Faculty of Law. And for the first time, she decided that there was a need to provide a crèche, for after-school childcare. Before then, typically, the ladies would come in the morning, do their work as best as they can, and once they pick up the children, that's it for the day. Most of the lectures will be sandwiched between dropping off children at school and picking them up in the afternoon. But we know, of course, that perceptions of excellence, unfortunately, also have to do with how much you are seen to be around, how available you are. So if every time there's something to be done and your name is mentioned, that, oh, okay, this person is hardworking, is focused, they'll say, oh, but her visa expires at 2 o'clock when she does the school run. And so she decided to take that up and, being a woman, of course, she had passed the stage of childbearing and so on, but she solved the problem she had to deal with, for other women coming behind. And now also we have female leaders who create opportunities for women, support their visibility, provide some of the, like we had the session I talked about earlier in the afternoon, where our first female vice chancellor and the deputy vice chancellor, research and academics shared their own experiences. And we found that it was actually true that many of us will do back-breaking jobs when you're appointed into certain positions. Those positions may not come with any visibility at all, but you are just behind getting things to run. But when it comes to positions of visibility and impact and all that, we tend to shy away. But now these things are being talked about. Institutional policies are being developed. Now we have not just maternity leave, but also paternity leave, so that the men can also take time off to bond with the children or the family. And this then, gives, helps in subtle ways to change the narrative that it's the sole and exclusive responsibility of women to engage in childcare or family care and so on. So I think, just to mention a few, these are some of the policies, the institutional support that can really help to change the narrative, and that can really help, that make a lot of difference when women are in positions of authority, because they have experienced some of the problems and they know how best to address it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. While we may not want to say that those sensitivities are only on the part of females, because sometimes there are men who are also considerate, but the fact still remains that when you have diversity and you give voice to the women, also the females, there is diversity of perspective, which can help improve quality of research, quality of teaching, and be supportive, especially to early career researchers. I have an example also in my institution. Before now, assistant lecturers, if you're on that level, you are not given a paid maternity leave, because it's assumed that it's a training position. So this is a level where they need all the support, financial and emotional support. So we cannot at this stage say no, because they are early career researchers still training, so you don't want to waste money, you don't want to waste money on them. And today, it has been reversed. So they get paid when they go on maternity leave. We also have paternity leave, like you said, even though it's just a week, but at least it's still something, and we are starting from somewhere. So it's very important to take into consideration gender responsiveness in our institutional frameworks. So we can look at gender equity indicators in the institution. We can also leverage on data to track gender gaps so that we can improve on it. We can also form partnerships, mentorship, and we make it formal mentoring programs to also support early career researchers. Thank you.
We just have, I'm being given the time up message there. Professor Okeke, could you just take 1 minute, please? Because I know we haven't heard from you before we wrap up. Yeah.
Do my best to be snappy about it. First of all, I wanted to return to comments that were made by you, Judy, before you asked the last question, and comments that have been made by others. First of all, capacity building was mentioned by one of the panelists, and I think it's very important for us to not see capacity building as something that is telling Africans what to do. Some of the most important capacities we need built now are for people around the world outside of Africa to understand what excellence is and the importance of diversity in promoting it. So I think that's one area where we have agency, and we should use it. Judy, you mentioned partnerships, and I did just want to mention that you're right to say partnerships between the North can often be unbalanced. And so we have to think about ways to get rid of that imbalance. And also just to emphasize that some of the best partnerships that I've had have been with other African scientists. That way, you know, the playing field is level, the creativity and the originality is amazing, and everybody around the world can see what the excellence is. So a few other important things that one has to think about when one is a research leader and considering gender responsiveness. I won't go into the ones that were very good points that were mentioned by the other speakers. Is some of the things are really, really small. Access to internet connectivity means that female workers who need to leave and go home in the evening to do childcare or elder care or whatever else it is they're doing away from the workplace can continue to work on their own timetables. So my group, for example, we have we have a handful of bioinformaticians, and we have more females than males. And this is unusual, not just in Africa, but around the world. Bioinformatics is a terribly male shifted field. And a few of the things we've been able to do with childcare, maternity leave, and giving remote access have meant that members of my group have actually been motivated. Females in my group have been motivated to move into bioinformatics. And then the importance of extramural funding as a way to buy flexibility. It turns out that my institution does not credit grantmanship. If you get a grant, it does not help towards your promotion. And so there's a disincentive to get grants. But in actual fact, if you do have a grant, you can sometimes buy flexibility. And this is something that I tell my female mentees, something that they need to do so that they can give themselves that edge, even if the university is asking them not to do it. And in the interest of time, I'll just mention one more, and this connects to the previous panel. I heard at the end of it, there was a young researcher commenting on the fact that she gets more support from males. It turns out, certainly within my setting, that at the upper level of the ivory tower, it's predominantly populated by males. And so if you're just randomly looking for someone who is going to be your mentor, your supporter, there's a chance that that person will be male. In fact, those of us who are females, we have to carry a very large, and we do it, a very large burden of mentorship just to make sure that women can get mentorship. So what we really need to do is to have programs that identify male allies. That is the people that would mentor women just as well as women would, so that we can get rid of the imbalance. If men are not helping us, it's going to be very difficult to promote enough women so that we have a balance at the upper level. So I have a few more things on the list, but I do recognize that our time is over. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm conscious about time, and I think Professor Okeke has summed up that very nicely. I don't want to have to repeat what's already been said by everybody, and everyone here has heard, but I've taken a few key points that I'll pass on to you. But I think that was really insightful from the panel. Just another big applause, please. Thank you.